Levine has 2134. Okay, just present them and if you lose our call.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
What do you got?
This is a very modest measure on body cameras, which are not currently in the code. The MPPS set up a model policy. Paragraph 53 on page 4 of the bill established a model policy. It really changed, maintained the model policy they've already established. They brought a number of stakeholders together, and indeed it's so modest that the ACLU actually is going to oppose this. I had a wonderful talk with Claire yesterday, and she points out all the things that are not included, many of which, frankly, I agree with her, but I think it's important to get something in place. Basically, what this bill does, if you look at the heart of it, which is on the end of page 4 and 5, is it says that it doesn't require any body-worn cameras of anyone, but it says that if a law enforcement agency wants to purchase or deploy a body-worn camera system, they have to establish a written policy. It has to have identified best practices, because of Virginia law, uses guidance from model policy that may be required to do the model policy. But it does say it should be follow best practices, and most importantly, I think, is the last sentence, which says that prior to adoption of the policy for the operation of body-worn camera system, the agency shall make the policy available for public comment and review. So body cameras are actually seen by both the police and by a number of civil rights groups as a wonderful way to determine truth. We don't know in a lot of these awful police shootings, we don't know who was in the wrong if there's no video there. It could be the citizen, it could be the police officer. And what I found, and we have both the NAACP and the sheriffs and the police agreeing at least to these minimum standards, that we need to have something in the code, we need to have something written in for comment, because at the end of the day, the camera helps us determine what really happened. And 99% of police officers do the right thing, but they're not hesitant about stopping the 1% that don't. Citizens often do the right thing. We just want to find out what the right thing is. So again, I agree with the ACLU, this could be strengthened. I had a much stronger bill last year. This has been watered down to what we can agree on. And basically it simply says make it available for public comment. These things are very controversial. And frankly, we can have localities try different policies, and some go farther than others, and we can see and get best practices as we move along through this relatively new area.
Like key making that?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and members of the subcommittee. First of all, we didn't work together on this bill, but we ended up in the same location. And the reason I care about this bill is, as you may know, I represent Fairfax County, and I also have jurisdiction within Fairfax County, Indiana, and right down the street from me is the city of Fairfax. Fairfax County has had an our police commission that studied the issues of police force, what have you, for the last year and a half or so. The county, as part of the conversation, my constituent was a chair that looked at body cameras and use of force issues. And they made a number of recommendations, including that Fairfax County ought to adopt some body-worn camera policies for the Fairfax County jurisdiction, which of course is the largest police jurisdiction. The county board has punted for now. They said, well, it's still a new technology, there's a lot of issues, privacy issues, data concerns, so why don't we give ourselves another 18 months to really consider this before we adopt it? So that's where Fairfax County is. The city of Fairfax has gone forward and started purchasing it and started using it as of last month. The town of Vienna is kind of in the middle saying, well, what do we do? Because we're inside of the larger county, do we do our own, do we wait for the county? So the bottom line for me was, and the county folks that I talked to was, we need some standards across the state so that every jurisdiction is thinking about the exact question now. Do we do it, do we not, what the costs are, what should be our policies? They have some guidelines that they can follow as opposed to them all doing it ad hoc and coming up with 20, 30, 40 different policies. So I think for our counties and our local jurisdictions that are within the counties, it would be helpful to have the states tell us, these are the minimum standards, these are the ways you should do it. Retain the data, this is the privacy concern, these are all the ways that you should work with this. And then once that standard's out there from the commission, it makes it a lot easier for counties to say, okay, let's adopt that as a way for us to move forward. This has nothing to do with the cost, we're not mandating, we're not requiring anybody to do it. But if the counties are doing it, localities are doing it, we want them to follow at least some minimum standards. And I think the only difference between our bills is that we really, my version really emphasizes the need to have minimum statewide standards from which the counties can show above that, but that the counties and the states are experts here ought to develop the minimum standards. And the minimum standards obviously are looked at across the country as well. We're looking at best practices around the country. I had some meetings during the NCSL, several meetings, and talked to some of my colleagues across the country. And other states are grappling with the exact same issues. So the technology is out there, people are doing best practices to the extent that our folks at the state level can adopt that and then come up with the best standards for us. I think that would be the best way to move forward. That's where my bill is.
Thank you. Questions for the patrons before we hear from the audience? All right, anyone here wishing to speak in favor of the bill?
Mr. Chairman, John Jones, Sheriff Association. The bill doesn't mandate body cameras. It says if you have a body camera, you have a policy. And that's a good idea. The worst case scenario is for law enforcement agencies just put body cameras on the house with no policy. So we worked last year long and hard. It started off with a bad bill, ended up with a bill. You have to, it's a good bill now, you have to have a policy if you're gonna have body cameras.
All right, anyone else wishing to speak in favor of the bill?
Mr. Chairman, Jesse Fryers from the Virginia State Conference and NAACP. We've had conversations with a number of Commonwealth attorneys across the state, and the term that we hear most is the Commonwealth attorneys are not the police or police when it comes down to the use of body cameras, because there are no standard procedures. It's getting very, very difficult when a number of police departments have cameras, and folks do what they want. As well as from our perspective, the public has a desire obviously for the body cam, but at the same time, there was a real question about folks doing what they want to do with cameras. We have had situations, particularly in Riker County, when an officer actually turned his camera off and got involved in an altercation where a woman was shot 8 times, passenger in the car, and neither the driver nor the passenger were prosecuted for any offense whatsoever. So there's a great deal of interest by the public to have more confidence in police, more confidence in public safety officials, as well as the use of this equipment. We think that this bill would be a step in that direction to standardizing how body cams are used across the state. So we are enthusiastically in favor of this bill and look forward to
Thank you. Anyone else? Anyone against?
Yes, sir.
Claire?
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, the American Civil Liberties Union of Virginia believes that body cams are useful tools only if they are deployed in accordance with the right policies. And we have, the model policy that DCGS has in place now was developed with law enforcement and published, and we were given an opportunity to comment after it was published, but no changes were made after our comments. And we continue to believe that the model policy is grossly inadequate to protect the public in a number of ways.
So there is a model policy.
There is a model policy. It was published in September of 2015. It's republished in October.
Are you aware of any police department that's not following model policy?
I don't know that when we did our study of all of the, we did a FOIA of every department, and we analyzed policies from across the state, and we looked at 60 policies, including the model policy, and frankly, none of them met our standards. We've subsequently worked with Westmoreland County and the Sheriff's Department there, and they've developed a policy that meets all of the things that we think are important. We worked with Fairfax City on their policy. We were invited to comment on the Richmond policy and a number of others across the Commonwealth. And some people have, incorporated some of our comments, and some have chosen not to. But the model policy itself, to the extent that you hold it up and say it's a best practice or it's a guideline for the departments to follow, you are endorsing a policy that doesn't prohibit surveilling citizens engaged in First Amendment activities, even where there's absolutely no indication that there's any criminal activity. It doesn't. It says specifically that officers are authorized to review the film of the body cams before they write the reports in an officer-involved shooting. And I was on an expert panel at ICAP, the International Association of Chiefs of Police, and serious questions were raised about whether that's in either the police departments or the citizens' interest to have that be the policy. And so there are a number of issues with the model policy with which we disagree. This bill doesn't mandate body cams, and the ACLU is not saying everybody has to have a body cam. That's not our policy. We are saying that if we're going to have body cams, that there should be uniform standards. This doesn't mandate uniform standards. This basically says, here's a model, and you can follow it or not follow it. It's not going to regularize things across the Commonwealth, because different departments will make different choices, and they have resisted any bill that has mandated uniform minimums, which is what John described as the bad bill last year that Delegate Levine had, because they want the freedom to do different things differently. So in all due respect, we think this bill is worse than no bill. And while we have lots of issues with body cams, we think they can be positive tools, but without the right policies in place, they can be worse than not having body cams at all. There's nothing in here that would specifically mandate, for example, discipline if somebody chooses not to turn their body cam on. And one of the things again that concerns me is in that kind of gross misconduct, and somebody can get fired, they can still cross a jurisdiction and become a police officer in another jurisdiction because they can't be decertified for that kind of misconduct. So all in all, we just don't think this does anything that is helpful, and so we oppose the bill.
Thank you, Claire.
Delegate
Hope.
question for Claire. I mean, Claire, your example that you just cited about turning off your body cam, that sounds to be like a simple thing that would be included in every policy. It's really obvious. So under Delegate Levine's bill, if it became law, they would probably address that in the policy. I mean, that's ridiculous that they wouldn't address it.
Delegate
Because it's not explicitly saying so in this language, doesn't mean that they wouldn't do it.
I completely understand what you're saying, and the policies vary radically from jurisdiction to jurisdiction about whether they are explicit about sanctions that would be imposed for non-compliance with the policy. And we've encouraged every policy to include specific language about sanctions that would be imposed for non-compliance, but not all of them do.
Well, why don't you support this bill passing, and then you come out with a model policy for everyone to follow?
Delegate Hope, we published a model policy a year ago. We presented it to the governor's task force. We've presented it to all the different law enforcement agencies. We use it in any conversation that we have, as we have had. We've been invited, and we're very grateful to be invited by a number of chiefs and sheriffs to comment on their policies and to provide feedback. But, the reality is that if you hold the particular model policy that exists now up and say people should follow it, you would be saying that every jurisdiction that had it would somehow be in compliance with best practices, and frankly, we don't believe that it is in compliance with best practices. And it is not explicit enough in areas about retention, access to video by the people who are being videoed, and a number of other issues.
Okay. Dana?
Here's our concern. The concept of a model policy is lost in these mandate bills because a model is exactly that. It's meant to be flexible and adaptable to the standards of the agency, to the standards of the community, to the resources of the agency. When you mandate the components of model policy, you are giving over essentially what is a lawmaking authority of the General Assembly to the Department of Criminal Justice Services. So that's the concern we have, is that model policy was never meant to be a replacement for law. It was meant to be guidance that has some flexibility in it. So that's our concern, is that we don't confuse what model policy is with specific legal standards that may be passed by the General Assembly.
Thank you. Anyone else wishing to speak?
Ron Caldwell, Wilmington City Commonwealth Attorney, on behalf of VOCA. We would have asked the committee to approach this with caution. I'm sorry we didn't get to speak to the patrons prior to this, but quite frankly, body cameras is technology and evolution, much like when we had any kind of in-car cameras first came on. There was no uniformity. Best practices, uniform practices, that will be debated. But of concern to us, and I would preface this by saying, we tend societally to look at body cameras as protecting society against police. But these are wonderful tools for helping the prosecution. And what we're particularly concerned about is the language that says no department can deploy or purchase without that uniform policy. And I think that discourages departments from getting in. So I would submit that even improperly or imperfectly, not improperly, but imperfectly used body camera systems by police departments and sheriff's departments, state police that are moving in that direction, are better than no body cam systems at all. Just asking, because this is the way to the future, and eventually we will have uniform policy. But I don't think we should discourage departments from getting involved with purchasing and deploying as soon as they can.
Okay. Anyone else wishing to speak on the bill? All right, Delegates Levine, Keem, I'll give you last word.
So, Mr. Chairman, this is a modest measure. Claire is right. I had a much more ambitious measure last year. that a good friend John Jones thought was too ambitious, that actually implement a number of the concerns that Claire had. So I share her concerns. It is a modest measure. It does not prohibit anyone from deploying. All it says is you need to have a written policy so that people know what the rules are. It should be available for public comment and review. And it says that using as guidance, and I'd be more than happy if it's the will of the committee to say using as minimum guidance. Because yes, the policy can be made better. Yes, people can always improve it. But let's get these things out there, subject to a written policy. Let's see what works. Let's see what jurisdictions do better than others. And in time, it is an evolving technology. It's an evolving area of the law. It does say she'll follow identified best practices. So that actually allows for the flexibility as we learn more about what works and what doesn't work to improve it and to get things better. But I don't think whatever people do with body cameras, it should be in secret. Let the public know what's going on. Let's know what the rules are. Maybe one jurisdiction lets them turn it off, which I don't approve of. Another one doesn't, but at least people will know ahead of time what the rules are, so we don't have people on their own, police officers think, oh, I think I can turn this off, because there's no written policy.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Chair, the members here, and first of all, I wasn't part of the conversation last year, so I'm not aware of the breadth of the length of the conversations. My interest in this was that my constituent who served on this commission in Fairfax County brought this to me as an idea to have some uniformity across the state, so that's one. Second point is, I disagree a little bit with Claire in that what this bill does, there's two parts of this. One is to say the DCJS shall come up with model policies. If they have one already, that's fine, but that doesn't mean that that's the model. What we're saying is they need to have a model, but the model has to also include some standards which are in the language that says the models have to do this. That's one. The second part of it is that if the local jurisdiction wants to go forward and deploy and purchase, that's great, but that agency also should have written policies. I can't imagine a jurisdiction in this state anywhere, law enforcement that says, let's go buy some body cameras, start deploying it without any kind of a policy whatsoever. That would be dangerous. So what we want to do is make sure that every local jurisdiction follows the minimum guidelines, and we emphasize word minimum because there are some minimum standards that everybody agrees on. That DCJS comes up with the minimum standards, and you on top of that can add more, and certainly others can add a lot more than that. But at a minimum, I think the state ought to have some minimum standards that every jurisdiction follows. So that's really all it does.
Well, I appreciate that. I know that the timely issue is still moving forward, ongoing. The model standards are at DCJS. I confess I need to dig into these model standards a little bit more, because one thing I don't like is when the legislature delegates responsibilities over certain issues and doesn't follow up to make sure that they're comfortable with what's put in place. Before we codify or legislate a minimum standard, I think we need to learn a little bit more about what DCJS has done and what's still apparently ongoing in terms of discussions. I know that as a former prosecutor, we didn't see them as much, but back then, but now I hear from prosecutors who are dealing with body cam video and the amount of video and the time that it takes to review all of the video, because they're obligated to do that. And so we're talking about hours and hours and hours, and they should do that, but then you've got pressures on staffing and employment and time of the prosecutor's offices as well. There are certain angles that haven't even been discussed today. So while I'm sympathetic to some direction that's comprehensive and enables local law enforcement to have some guidance, I also don't want to infringe some flexibility of law enforcement agencies to implement policy that best suits them. So I think we're moving in the right direction with the standards that DCJS has come up with. I would encourage the local law enforcement agencies to review those standards, but codifying them at this point may be a little premature.
Mr. Chairman, and I'd certainly be willing to put this over for another week, have everyone look at the standards. I think anyone who looks at them will see they are quite minimal, and they basically just talk about, it's a written policy. I think I'd be willing, if that's all I get for this committee, to simply just take the last line, which maybe I can even get clear support, just saying just the last line of the bill, prior to the adoption of a written policy for the operation of a body-worn camera system, requiring a written policy, and I can redraft it, require a written policy, and prior to adoption of a written policy, it should be made to the public available, public comment review, not even require the DCJS standards, that people will look to it as a model with or without our guidance. But I do think it's important that whatever policy is in place, there's a written policy before these things get implemented, and it's subject to public comment and review. And if that's all I get out of this committee, I'll take that.
Well, I think what I can commit is to, if you'd like to convene a meeting of stakeholders to talk about this going forward, whether this is something that is even too minimal for other patrons and other interested parties to accept, that may be the case. I know that this board as is too minimal for Claire. So, and, you know, the sheriffs are supportive of this bill, but they may not be supportive of the minimal bill. I don't know yet, but, I'm happy to work with the patrons going forward.
Can we put this over before?
No, I'm happy to convene a meeting, in the off-season. All right, so motion second, recommend report.
Second.
All right,
Have an alternate,
Delegate Will.
take the bill.
There's a motion lay on the table. Is there a second? All right, all in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? No. All right, thank you, delegates.
Thank you, sir.
All right, thank you, Delegate Hope. All right, okay, we still have a quorum for the time.